If you remember for the past few months really, we've been looking at something, and that is these attributes we gain through our faith. And then last Sunday, if you remember, we kind of finalized that. And looking at our faith versus our doubt, and how that if we have doubt, the things that we gain from faith we don't gain, because our doubt takes the place of faith. But remember back to the very beginning when we first started it, we looked at Job. And we're going to start looking at Job this morning. But before we really get into our lesson, before we really get into this, and we're going to talk about the teachings about worry this morning. And before we do, I want to first make a little disclaimer. And the reason is because sometimes when there's a lesson like this, people think that you're trying to solve everybody's problems right away. That's really not the case. This lesson is not one that is meant to take away our worries. Because the reality of it is that we're human and we're going to have worries. So that's not the purpose of this lesson. The purpose of this lesson isn't to make somebody feel bad for being worried about stuff. Again, we get worried about things. And it's nothing really bad to feel when you're worried about things in your life. But the purpose of this lesson is to show us the teachings of Christ. Show us what does Christ teach us about our worries. Where is the importance that is there? And we're going to look in Matthew chapter 6 in order to find that here in just a little while, but not quite yet. I ask you to turn over to Job, because when we look at Job, we see something happen to him. But it's important when we recognize Job, and we're going to look at him first, is that when we talk about these worries, and we talk about these anxieties and these stresses, no one's immune from them. Nobody's immune from having these types of things go on in their life. Even so much so that we talk about these things. Well, there's such a thing as a good worry, and there's such a thing as a bad worry. Realize that? Worries aren't always a bad thing to have in our life. Sometimes we worry and we stress about certain things that help us. I'm sure that each of us, before we had children, we were worried about how we were going to raise our children, weren't we? Worried about what are we going to do to make sure that we're raising them in the proper way. That is a good worry for us to have. Why? Because it prepares us. Because it gets us ready for doing these things. Or maybe it's you starting a new job. And we get worried because we want to make sure that we're doing things right. Or maybe it's whatever the case may be, if it's marriage, if it's worrying about if you're having a boy or a girl, whatever the case may be. I wish Zach and Zoe were here because I already told Zach I was going to do that. But there's so many things that we worry about, right? And sometimes they're a good thing, but a lot of times they're a bad thing. There's bad worries that we have when we worry about our finances. When we put so much worry on those things. Or when we worry, I got a small list up here. Or maybe when we worry about losing our jobs. But that directly relates once again to what? To our finances. Maybe we worry about when we're going to lose a loved one. I'm sure that all of us have felt that at some point. We're worried about losing people we're close to. Or maybe when we lose them, then we're stressed because we lost the people we were close to. Those people who we were sounding boards. I know I was when my grandpa passed away. I was worried because I knew he was sick, but yet I found I was worried when he died. Because I no longer had that soundboard. But we're going to get back to talking about the fact that no one's immune from it, right? In order to do that, we're going to look at Job. As we kind of mentioned, I had to backtrack a little bit. I lost my place. When we look here at Job, what we see happening in his life is that he did indeed face major disasters. Two in particular, when we look at him. And we did so earlier. We saw that he lost his livestock and his children. We saw that he then lost his health. And how does Job respond? Well, we see that he does indeed turn to God. But how does he respond physically? If you remember last week, we looked in Job chapter 2, verse 8. And when we looked there, it told us this. It says, "And he took for himself a potsherd which was to scrape himself while he sat in the midst of the ashes." There was something that overcame Job, wasn't there? There was a lot of stuff that he was dealing with, losing all these things. Do you think he wasn't worried? I'm pretty positive he was. Or maybe if we look at a different example, and we look at Jacob. I like looking at Jacob a lot lately. Maybe it's because we've been doing a study personally on it. But as we look at it, we turn over to Genesis, the 32nd chapter. Genesis, the 32nd chapter, and I meant to fix that. It's not verse 78, it's verses 7 through 8. I meant to fix that. I apparently did not fix that. Genesis 32, verses 7 through 8, it says, So Jacob was greatly afraid and distressed, and he divided the people that were with him, and the flocks and herds and camels into two companies. And he said, If Esau comes to one company and attacks it, then the other company which is left will escape it. What was Jacob afraid of? What was Jacob worried about? His brother. He was afraid of his brother, afraid that his brother was going to come and bring an army and wipe him out. So he divided up his camps. But why was he worried? This is something really important for us to recognize. Why indeed was he worried about what was going to happen? If you turn back to Genesis, the 25th chapter. In Genesis, the 25th chapter, we read verses 29 through 34. It says, Now Jacob cooked the stew, and Esau came in from the field, and he was weary. And Esau said to Jacob, Please feed me with the same red stew, for I am weary. Therefore his name was called Edom. But Jacob said, Sell me your birthright as of this day. And Esau said, Look, I am about to die, so what is the birthright to me? Then Jacob said, Swear to me as of this day. So he swore to him and sold his birthright to Jacob. And Jacob gave Esau bread and stew of lentils, and he ate and drank, arose and went his way. Thus Esau despised his birthright. We see Esau despising his birthright. Well, what happened? Jacob had him sell it to him. That's going to play a major factor as we continue to look at Jacob, because we're going to see why this worry ended up coming upon him. Because you see, because Jacob had him sell this birthright to him, we turn down to chapter 27. Chapter 27 in the book of Genesis, and we read verses 41 through 46. It says, So Esau hated Jacob because of the blessing which his father blessed him. And Esau said in his heart, The days of mourning for my father are at hand, then I will kill my brother Jacob. And the words of Esau, her older son, were told to Rebekah. So she sent and called Jacob, her younger son, and said to him, Surely your brother Esau comforts himself concerning you by intending to kill you. Now therefore, my son, obey my voice. Arise, flee to my brother Laban in Haran, and stay with him a few days until your brother's fury turns away, until your brother's anger turns away from you, and he forgets what you have done to him. Hey, let's read that again real quick. It says, Until your brother's anger turns away from you, and he forgets what you have done to him. It says, Then I will send and bring you from there. Why should I be bereaved also of you both in one day? And Rebekah said to Isaac, I am weary of my life because of the daughters of Heth. If Jacob takes a wife of the daughters of Heth like these, who are the daughters of the land, what good will my life be to me? Rebekah is afraid for Jacob, goes and tells Jacob and says, because what you have done to him, Esau is angry with you, and he seeks to take your life. Jacob was worried, and he was rightfully worried. He should be. We look down in chapter 28, verse 5, we see Isaac ends up sending Jacob away at the words of Rebekah. So why was Jacob afraid? Jacob was afraid because of what he did. Because of choices he made in his life that caused his brother to become angry with him. Angry to the point that he wanted to kill him. Or what if we go into the New Testament and we look there? You see, when we look at Peter, we see that he goes out after he denies Christ. He goes out and he weeps bitterly. We know that there was emotion that was brought upon him. But why? Why was this emotion brought upon him? When we look in Matthew chapter 26 and we read verses 31 through 35. It says, Then Jesus said to them, All of you will be made to stumble because of me this night, for it is written, I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep of the flock will be scattered. But after I have been raised, I will go before you to Galilee. Peter answered and said to him, Even if all are made to stumble because of you, I will never be made to stumble. We're going to read that again. He tells Christ, Even if all are made to stumble because of you, I will never be made to stumble. Jesus said to him, Surely I say to you this night, before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times. Peter said to him, Even if I have to die with you, I will not deny you. And so said all the apostles, all the disciples. When we see there, what does Peter do? Christ tells him, You're going to deny me. You're going to be scattered. Christ is telling them, is preparing them for what's going to happen. Peter responds by saying, No, I will not. even if I have to die. But what ends up happening? We go down just a few verses. We see what Christ said was going to happen indeed does happen. But as we read there in verse 75, as we read there in verse 75 of Matthew chapter 26, it says, "And Peter remembered the word of Jesus, who had said to him, 'Before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times.' So he went out and wept bitterly." Why did he weep? Well, because he remembered that Jesus told him, "You will deny me, you will be scattered." And he also remembers what? Because it was what he said. He remembered that he told Christ that he was not going to deny him. He told Christ that even if it means he dies with him, he's not going to deny him. Because the only way that he would have felt what he did is if he remembered what he said, and what he realizes happened is that he did not do it. Why is it so important for us to recognize these things? Because these were choices that were made. Choices that were made. Jacob specifically, we see this choice he makes that causes him to be worried for his life. We see a choice that Peter makes that causes him to feel a great deal of emotional anguish. And when we see that, we recognize something. There are often times when we talk about our worries that they're not caused by an outside source. Maybe they're caused by us. Maybe that's not something we necessarily want to hear, but it's the truth. I understand right now we're going through a time, we're going through a lot of things, and I didn't cause COVID-19. Right? That wasn't me. Promise. But it's something that we're dealing with. Is it causing worry in our life? Absolutely. Is it causing anguish in our life, problems in our life? Yes. But that doesn't mean that that's the only thing that causes worries in my life. When I was younger, I remember I wasn't that great taking care of my money, so I had a lot of worries about making sure my bills got paid on time. But that was because it was my fault. I made the mistakes. That's why it's so important for us to recognize these things about our worries. But even more important than that, it's important for us to see, what does Jesus teach us about worry? Let's read Matthew chapter 6. Let's read there in verses 25 through 27. This is where we're going to spend most of our time for the remainder of our lesson this morning. It says, "Therefore I say to you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat or what you will drink, nor about your body, what you will put on. Is not life more than food, the body more than clothing? Look at the birds of the air, for they neither sow nor reap nor gather into barns, yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not of more value than they? Which of you by worrying can add 1 cubit to your stature?" This is where we're going to look. And the reason is when we look there at the very beginning, and Jesus says this, "Therefore I say to you, do not worry about your life." This is why I said this lesson isn't meant to just take away your worries, because you try to tell somebody who's worrying, try to tell them, okay, just stop. That doesn't work. But what we see is Christ saying, don't worry about your life. And the reason he says this is you have to go back into verse 24. You see that word, therefore? That's an important word. It says, "Therefore I say to you." Why? Because in verse 24 he says this, "No one can serve 2 masters. For either he will hate one and love the other, or else he will be loyal to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon." Other versions are going to say you cannot serve God and wealth. What does this have to do with us worrying about our life? When we become to worry about our life, when this happens, and it does happen, doesn't it? What is actually happening? We worry about our life, and because we're worrying about our life, we're worrying about what we're going to eat. These are the 3 necessities. We'll look at that here in just a second. The 3 necessities. We worry about what we eat, we worry about what we're going to drink, and we worry about what we're going to put on. And we see that we begin to prioritize wealth. Because we have to make sure, I have to make sure that I have the money to take care of myself and take care of my family and take care of all of these things. I have to make sure. So what do? We prioritize it. But what happens when we begin to prioritize wealth? Then we let wealth, we let mammon become our master. That's what happens. Maybe we realize it, maybe we don't, but that is what's going to happen if we prioritize money over God. Jesus tells them, do not worry about your life. And then he gets a little bit more specific. He doesn't just leave it there and say, not worrying about your life. He says this, what you will eat, what you will drink, nor about your body, what you put on, is not life more than food, and the body more than clothing. What is Jesus saying here? Well, what Jesus brings up here, as we just mentioned, the must-haves. The things that we have to have in our life. He says, do not worry about these things. You know, it's important when we look at this to recognize in our life, we have things that we have to have. We have things that we want to have, don't we? And the interesting thing is that a lot of times we call them our needs and our wants. But Jesus is telling him here, you have no need of these things that you need. No worries about these things that you need. And he goes to explain why in just a moment, and we'll look there. But if Jesus is telling them you don't need to worry about these needs, then why in the world would we let our wants make us worry about stuff? Why in the world would we let ourselves think that I need all of this extra stuff? Well, the problem is because society has sat there and they brainwash us. And we end up looking at these needs and we look at our wants and we start thinking that they're the same type of thing. That I need to have a phone with 5G. That I need to have the best wireless network. Do we not see this in commercials all the time? Well, Verizon has little dots and T-Mobile has this whole big area. They make you think that you need to have all of this extra stuff in our life. Or what about houses? They make us think that we need to have the nice big houses and all this extra fancy equipment in it. Or we need to have cameras in our refrigerators to make sure that while we're at the grocery store and we forgot to do our grocery list. Why are we at the grocery store to begin with? I don't know. So we can look in our refrigerator and see, sorry, I'm ranting. The point is that we don't need to let our wants become our needs because they're not the same thing. That's not reality. What reality is the fact that Jesus is teaching us that we don't need to worry about our needs. And if we don't need to worry about that, why worry about our wants? But then Jesus goes on and he tells us exactly why we don't need to worry about them. He doesn't just leave it there and say you don't need to worry about these. If you ever go talk to somebody when you're having problems, I've done that. Right? Going through a lot of struggle and times I go talk to a counselor or somebody and they start giving you advice on how to fix things. Jesus does exactly that. And what is he? The best counselor ever. The best teacher ever. So let's listen to these words. He says in verse 26, look at the birds of the air. For they neither sow nor reap nor gather into barns, yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not of more value than they? Jesus is bringing up a few points in this verse. First point he's making up when he says that the Heavenly Father feeds them is that he's recognizing he created them. They were created indeed by God. If we turn over to the 139th Psalm. In the 139th Psalm, we read there in verses 13 through 16. The writer writes this, For you formed my inward parts. You covered me in my mother's womb. I will praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Marvelous are your works, and that my soul knows very well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was made in secret, and skillfully wrought in the lowest parts of the earth. Your eyes saw my substance being yet unformed. And in your book they were all written, the days fashioned for me, yet as yet there were none of them. He's writing here and he's saying, you formed me. You made me. I am fearfully and wonderfully made. We were created by God. And if he's going to take care of his creation, that he takes care of the birds so that they neither sow nor reap, but yet he still feeds them? Why in the world would we think that we're not going to be taken care of in the things that we need to have in this life if we're following God? Absolutely, we will be taken care of. But not only do we recognize that we have been made by God, we can go one further than the birds, can't we? Turn over to the Genesis chapter 1, verse 26. In Genesis chapter 1, verse 26, it says this, Then God said, Let us make man in our image according to our likeness. Let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, over the cattle, over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. What does it say right there at the beginning? It says, let us make man in our image. That doesn't mean that God looks like us, like man with the bones and flesh. It means we were created with a soul. We were created with the ability to make choices. We hold incredible value unto God. Incredible value for every single thing. If we hold this value, will not God take care of us? Are we not of more value than these birds? Absolutely we are. We're of so much value, and we like to turn here when we talk about how valuable we are over in Romans, the 5th chapter and verse 8. But it's such a good verse to look at. It says, but God demonstrated His own love toward us, and that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. We have a lot of value, don't we? We are valuable. Right now is Suicide Awareness Month. I don't know if it's everywhere, but I know it is in the Air Force. And they brought around these pamphlets. And so we're putting them up all around the building, making sure people see it. And the reason is because we have a lot of stuff like that going on right now. And not just in the Air Force, but I'm sure in the country as well. But one of the things in there talks about how valuable we are, and that's something the Air Force brings up a lot, is how valuable we are. And they say, we don't care about these jets, we care about you. Sometimes you think, oh yeah, right. But you know what the reality is that when we talk about God and the value we have towards Him, that thought never crosses our minds. When we talk about how valuable we are to God, it's not, yeah, right. It's yes, we are. The reality of it is that we do, in fact, hold value. Our souls are, in fact, valuable. But Jesus goes on here as we look in Matthew chapter 6, verse 27, our final place where we find something to learn from here. It says, which of you by worrying can add 1 cubit to his stature? I think sometimes, how am I going to expand on this thought, right? How am I going to expand on what Jesus is teaching? And I could say something like, well, by worrying, what do we add? It's up there. Heartache, health problems, undue stress, relationships problems, the list goes on. We could talk about that. But I don't really want to. What I want to recognize is that Jesus makes a very simple statement by saying, which of you by worrying can add 1 cubit to his stature? And that is a great lesson for us. We're not going to add good things from us, and Jesus makes that clear. But when we let our worry go to God, then we add good things in our life. Then we add good parts of our life. And then we get to put our focus upon God. I thought about how to wrap everything up. I thought, we could bring up the fact that we're all going to face struggles, but I've kind of beat that horse, haven't I? We could bring up that we are valuable and that God's going to take care of us. But I decided I wanted to end by reading a psalm. If you'll turn over to the 46th psalm, it won't be up there. In the 46th psalm, it says this: God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Therefore we will not fear, even though the earth be removed, and though the mountains be carried into the midst of the sea, though its waters roar and be troubled, though the mountains shake with its swelling. There is a river whose streams shall make glad the city of God, the holy place of the tabernacle of the Most High. God is in the midst of her. She shall not be moved. God shall help her. Just at the break of dawn, the nations raged, the kingdoms were moved. He uttered his voice, the earth melted. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our refuge. Come, behold the works of the Lord, who has made desolations in the earth. He makes wars cease to the end of the earth. He breaks the bow and cuts the spear in two. He burns the chariot in the fire. Be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our refuge. Selah. When we read this psalm in particular, we're reminded that God, He isn't just a bystander. He isn't just looking down. He is our refuge. He is our fortress. He is our strength. He is every single thing we need. And when we face these times, these worries and struggles that maybe we're bringing on ourselves, maybe the rest of the world is why they're there. But God will never be moved. He will never be weakened. He will always be our strength and our refuge.